Okay, hello Cloud Gurus, and welcome to this lecture. In this lecture, we're going to look at AWS CloudTrail. It's going to be a mixture of theory as well as a hands-on lab. So we covered CloudTrail a little bit off in the last section, but we didn't really do a deep dive. So this is a deep dive on the service. So what is it? It's a web service that records AWS API calls for your account and delivers log files to you. So what does this actually mean? Well, let's have a look at an example. So over here, we've got the Amazon Cloud, and that's, could not just be a VPC, but that could be things like S3. This could be any kind of service like Lex or Poly or whatever. And then interfacing with the cloud, we've got our control plane. So this is our control plane. And basically our control plane consists of a whole bunch of public APIs. And when our user goes and interacts with the AWS platform, they do this either using the console, which is what we're most familiar with, or by doing an API call. So what do I mean by an API call? Well, here we go. We just type in AWS S3. So I've got the command line tools stored in here. We're going to do make bucket, and then I'm going to call it hello cloud gurus, and then just a whole bunch of random numbers, and that will go ahead and provision a bucket. So it's just making a simple API call to the control plane, and that has now provisioned a bucket for me in S3. So like I said, using the API or the console, we can actually provision things like DynamoDB databases or S3 buckets or EC2 instances, etc. So basically, CloudTrail is going to log all this. So it's going to log that there's been a creation to my DynamoDB database. It's going to log that I've just created an S3 bucket. It's going to log that I've created an EC2 instance. What it won't log is things like RDP or SSH. So if I RDP or SSH into that EC2 instance and start installing things on it, CloudTrail is not going to log that. It's going to log API calls only, and that's really critical to understand going into your exam. So remember that it's only going to log the API calls. So what does CloudTrail enable us to do? Well, we get after the fact incident investigation. So if something goes on inside our AWS account, we can go back and look at the CloudTrail logs and see what exactly happened. And we get near real-time intrusion detection. So we can see as soon as somebody provisions a resource, that's going to be recorded in CloudTrail, and we'll be able to see that as well. It also gives us industry and regulatory compliance, because as soon as you turn CloudTrail on, suddenly you have an audit trail. So CloudTrail logs API call details for supported services, and you can get a list of the supported services down here. If you just go to docs.aws.amazon.com/CloudTrail/latest/user guide/CloudTrail supported services. And here it is, CloudTrail supported services. And if you scroll down, there's an awful lot of stuff that's supported by CloudTrail. In fact, it's actually more interesting to click on the unsupported services because these basically tell you what is not supported. So right now, Batch isn't supported, Glue isn't supported, Greengrass isn't supported, Shield isn't supported, etc., etc. So what is logged? Well, metadata around API calls, the identity of the API caller, so who's making the API call, the time the API call was made, the source IP address of the API caller, the actual request itself, so what is it that they're trying to do? Are they trying to provision an S3 bucket or an EC2 instance, and then the response elements returned by the service. So maybe S3 doesn't allow that particular user to create a bucket, so the response was a failed, or maybe it was a HTTP 200 success, something like that. So these are all the different things that CloudTrail is logged. So where is this all logged? Well, it's all sent to an S3 bucket, and you manage the retention yourself in S3, because when you send files to S3, by default, they're going to stay there forever. So you're going to need to set up policies such as lifecycle management policies to start either deleting this data or archiving it off to Glacier. It's entirely up to you. It depends on your organization. The actual logs themselves are delivered every 5 minutes to S3. And when you actually make an API call to any service, it won't necessarily be delivered to CloudTrail for up to 15 minutes. So this is why we say near real time. It can take about 15 minutes for the CloudTrail service to essentially log that item. And then every 5 minutes, those logs are sent over to S3. You can set up SNS notifications, so you can set up a notification so that if somebody creates a S3 bucket, it notifies you automatically, or if somebody creates a new EC2 instance, it notifies you automatically. And you can aggregate your logs across multiple different regions, and you can also aggregate your logs across multiple accounts. And in some ways, that's a really good security best practice, because if you have a separate AWS account with a separate root account, that essentially means that you can send all of the logs from your production account to a completely separate AWS account in a completely separate S3 bucket that only you can access. So that way, if somebody comes into your production account and they're a system administrator on your production account and they go through and start destroying everything, they can't then go into that separate AWS account and then go in and destroy the logs. So you'll have evidence of them doing it, and that is a good example of non-repudiation. So how do we do this? How do we set it up? Well, it is actually enabled by default. This is relatively new. It's only happened in August 2017, but it is now enabled by default for 7 days. So every AWS account will have CloudTrail turned on for the 7 days, and it will be sent to an S3 bucket, and you'll be able to go in and have a look, as to your logs, within CloudTrail. If you want it to go for longer, you need to go in and provision it. So let's go do this now. Okay, so I've logged into the AWS console. If we go down to services, you'll be able to see CloudTrail here. It's actually under management tools, not under security. Go ahead and click on that. You'll be able to see your recent events. So here's a whole bunch of recent events. You can see where I started using AWS Config Manager and in the last section. So that's my most recent event. So this is all being logged for the last 7 days, and you can go in and view it by clicking the event history. If we go back down here, it says these are the most recent events recorded by CloudTrail. To view all events for the last 7 days, go to event history. Now, right now, this is saving it to an S3 bucket. That S3 bucket isn't actually visible to me in S3. So what I need to do, if I want to, have audit trail for longer than 7 days, what I need to do is go ahead and create a new CloudTrail. So why don't we go and do that? I'm going to call this trail name and it has to be at least 3 characters, CloudTrail, very unique name. Apply trail to all regions. Now you could say no, and you could only apply it to specific regions, but that would be pretty stupid. You may as well apply it to all regions because you want to know what people are doing inside your AWS environment. We choose our different event types. So by default, it is all, but you could have read only or write only. And to explain this, basically, you could have a CloudTrail for just read only events. So if you're running an API operation such as describe EC2, that would be a read-only event, and you could send that to a read-only bucket. A write-only event could be something like terminate my EC2 instance. That's a write event, and that would send it to an S3 bucket that is a write-only S3 bucket. I'm just going to do all as a default. In here, we've got our data events. So this we can actually record down to S3 object levels. So we could actually see people putting data up into S3, as well as people going in and changing it. If you do that, though, additional charges are going to apply. I'm not going to. I'm just going to leave it as default. Storage location. So in here, we have to go in and create a S3 bucket. I'm going to call it my CloudTrail bucket, a cloud guru. Hopefully no one's taken that name. And I'm going to, in here, you can actually click on advanced and you can have log file prefixes. You can say whether or not you want to encrypt your logs. In here, by default, it says enable log file validation, which we'll go through in a couple of slides. And in here, we've got send SNS a notification for every log delivery file. So every time it sends a file to S3 every 5 minutes or so, that would also trigger an SNS notification. To me, that would be a nightmare. So I'm going to say no. I'm going to leave this enable log file validation though, and we're not going to encrypt our log files by default. So what we then do is we just go down here and hit create, and this should create our CloudTrail, and it can take a little bit of, it's provisioned or immediately. That's actually really good. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back over to services, and I'm going to go down into CloudFormation, and I'm going to use CloudFormation to provision myself an entire new WordPress environment. So if I go down to create a new stack, we can use a sample template. Feel free to click on the WordPress blog, and go ahead and hit next. In here, we've got our stack name, so we'll just call it my WordPress blog. You can see I've already done this before. I'm going to use everything as default, so I'm going to take my DB table name actually, copy that into my clipboard, and I'm going to make that my password. I'm going to make that my user. I'm going to use a T2 micro because I'm cheap. My key to this is the actual private key or key pair to log into your WordPress environment. If you wanted to do that, we'll go ahead and do that. And in here, we've got our SSH location. So we're going to open up this security group to the whole world. Go ahead and hit next. You've got some optional tags in here. We've got some optional identity access management roles. I'm just going to leave everything else as default and hit next, and we're going to go in and create it. And I really don't care whether or not this works, the WordPress blog works or not. What I do care about is what is going to be logged in CloudTrail. Now, like I said, it can take 15 minutes for this to be sent to CloudTrail, and then it can take another 5 minutes for these logs to be sent to our S3 bucket. So I'm going to pause this video for about 20 minutes. Okay, so it's been roughly 20 minutes. If I click in on CloudTrail, I should hopefully be able to see, here we go. Here's a whole bunch of CloudFormation, results. So it has logged all this, and hopefully it has sent it over to S3. So let's go into services and go down to S3. And in S3, we should see our bucket. Okay, so here I am in S3, and I'm going to go ahead and click on my CloudTrail bucket, A Cloud Guru. This is the one I created earlier. Right now, all I see is AWS logs. I then click on my account number, and then I click on CloudTrail. And there will be a new folder here under this subdirectory after we've had our CloudTrail turned on for just over an hour. And we'll see that in a bit. But that's essentially going to contain our digest files. And our digest files basically is a way of checking that nobody's gone in and changed our CloudTrail files. So if you click into CloudTrail, you'll see all the different regions. I spun up my my CloudFormation template in Northern Virginia, so that was in US East 1. If I click in here, we've got the date, so 2017, it's November, it's 7th, and in here you can see all the different CloudTrail logs. You can go ahead and download these and check the logs and then see what people have been doing. So that is CloudTrail logs in a nutshell. I'm just going to go back to this subdirectory. Actually, I think it's just under my account number. Like I said, you will take an hour. There you go. It literally just provisioned. I shocked myself. So here is our digest folders, and in here, this is the way that we can check whether or not the CloudTrail logs have been altered. Okay, so your digest files are essentially a way of validating whether or not your logs are actually valid, whether or not somebody, they're real logs, or if somebody has gone in and changed them. And the way it works is you've got to enable log file integrity validation, which we did when we were creating our CloudTrail. And essentially it creates a hash for every log file that's delivered. So every hour, CloudTrail creates and delivers a file that references the log files for the last hour and contains a hash of each. Now the hash is generated using public keys and private keys. Amazon themselves have the private key, so you'll never get access to that, but you can use a public key. And essentially what you can do is go in and just see whether or not the hash is correct and whether or not that file has been changed. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom, you can see validating CloudTrail log files integrity using the command line. You can click in there and it will give you the syntax as to how to validate your logs. Again, it's a little bit beyond the scope of this course, but you should just be aware of the digest file and its ability to check that your logs haven't been changed. So again, validating CloudTrail log file integrity, you can validate whether or not the log file's been modified or even deleted. And the way you do that, CloudTrail log file integrity validation comes with SHA-256 hashing, and for added security, you've got SHA-256 with RSA for digital signing. So the log files are always delivered with a digest file, provided you turn it on, of course, and digest files can be used to validate the integrity of the log file. So that's it for this lecture, guys. In the next lecture, we're going to look at how we can secure our log files and why we should secure our log files. And it's going to be a mixture of hands-on labs as well as theory. So if you've got the time, join me in the next lecture. Thank you.